A 34-year-old doctor, financially stable, works out 4 times a week, owns his place, by every conventional standard, one of the most eligible men in his city. His last date was 2.5 years ago. He deleted every app 14 months back, and when his co-worker asked him if that bothered him, he paused for a moment and said, honestly, with zero performance in his voice, not even a little. That answer should stop you in your tracks, because we live in a world that tells men their worth is measured by who wants them, and here's a man who, by every external metric, should be out there winning. Instead, he quietly stepped off the field, and he's not sad about it. He's thriving. That's the story this channel, Psyche Shift, is built to unpack. The real psychological mechanics underneath behavior that looks strange on the surface, but makes complete sense once you go a layer deeper. Because what's happening with men and dating right now isn't a crisis of masculinity. It's something far more revealing than that. The first thing people do when they hear this trend is reach for the comfortable explanation. They say, men are afraid of commitment. They say, men are addicted to video games and pornography and have lost the drive to connect. They say, men are just lazy. None of that holds when you actually look at the men who are opting out. A substantial portion of them aren't broken. They aren't bitter. They ran a rational calculation and arrived at a reasonable conclusion. And understanding that calculation, really understanding it, changes everything about how you see this conversation. So let's pull the curtain back section by section and look at what's actually driving this. Picture this. You're Owen, 29, a project manager. Smart, self-aware, decent communicator. You download a dating app because that's what you're supposed to do. You spend a Saturday afternoon building a profile, actual effort, thoughtful photos, a bio that sounds like you. Then you start sending messages, not copy-paste stuff. Real personalized openers based on what's in someone's profile. 2 weeks later, you've sent 41 messages. You've received 4 responses. 2 of those died within 3 exchanges. 1 gave you a number that never replied to your text. And the 4th conversation went well for 5 days and then vanished completely. No explanation, no context. What does your nervous system do with that experience? If you understand basic behavioral psychology, you already know the answer. When an organism puts out effort and receives unpredictable, shrinking rewards, it doesn't push harder indefinitely. It eventually stops. Psychologists call the energy tax you pay to get a behavior reinforced the response cost. When that cost climbs while the reinforcement drops, behavior extinguishes. This isn't weakness or fragility. It is literally how reward systems work in the human brain. But here's the layer. Most conversations skip entirely. The psychological damage isn't just in the rejection. It's in the particular kind of rejection that modern dating produces. Pre-app dating had social accountability built into it. You'd likely see the person again through mutual friends, at the same bar, in the same neighborhood. That friction kept both people acting with a baseline of humanity. You couldn't just ghost someone you might run into on Tuesday. Apps removed all of that friction. What filled the void was an experience that many men describe as genuinely dehumanizing. Not because anyone is evil, but because the architecture of the system strips away context, accountability, and any sense that the person on the other end sees you as fully real. So what do you actually do with this? First, recognize that a terrible ROI inside a broken system is not a verdict on you. It's data about the system. Second, audit where you're meeting people. The research on relationship formation consistently shows that shared environments, repeated exposure, and mutual context produce far better outcomes than cold, approach digital matching. If the machine isn't rewarding you, the answer isn't to grind harder inside the machine, it's to question whether the machine is even the right place to be. Now pay close attention here, because this is the part nobody anticipated. When men stop directing their energy toward dating, toward the constant cycle of crafting messages, preparing for dates, managing the anxiety of uncertainty, processing rejection, updating profiles, starting over, Something unexpected fills that space, and it's not emptiness, it's clarity. A guy named Theo, 31, spent 3 years in a near-constant low-grade romantic pursuit. Always swiping, always texting someone, always half-focused on whether a potential relationship was developing or dying. He described it later as living with background static, never quite present, because some part of his brain was always tracking the romantic, variable. When he stepped back, the static went quiet, and in that quiet he noticed something he'd been too distracted to see clearly. He had no idea what he actually wanted to do with his life outside of a relationship. His ambitions, his passions, his sense of what a good day looked like. All of it had been subordinated for years to the project of finding someone who'd approve of him. That realization hit him hard, but it also handed him something valuable, a genuine question worth answering. Who are you when no one's watching? What do you actually care about building? Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi spent decades studying what makes people feel most alive and engaged. His conclusion was that the higher states of well-being come not from receiving external validation, but from full absorption in a meaningful challenge, what he called flow. An activity where the difficulty is matched to your skill, where feedback is immediate, where time seems to bend, and, critically, nobody else's opinion is required for that state to exist. Theo started pursuing competitive cycling, something he dropped at 22 because it wasn't practical. A year later, he described weekend training rides as the best mental state he'd experienced in his adult life. This isn't about replacing human connection with a hobby. Let me be very clear about that. This is about something more foundational, learning that your sense of aliveness doesn't have to be rented from someone else's approval. When you know that, really know it in your bones, everything about how you engage with other people changes, including eventually romantic partners. So what do you do here? Go back and find the thing you abandoned because it wasn't useful. Not what sounds impressive to describe at a dinner party. The thing you did as a teenager that made you lose track of time. That thread runs through your whole life. Picking it back up tends to rearrange other things in surprisingly positive ways. Stop me if this sounds familiar. You meet a guy who's in a relationship and you notice something slightly uncomfortable about it. He seems to need his partner for everything. Emotional regulation, social plans, a sense of purpose. When she's busy, he seems lost. When they argue, his entire psychological state collapses. He's not a bad person. He's a man who has no other source of genuine human connection in his life. And so, he's loaded the entire weight of his emotional world onto one person. That's not a character flaw. That's what happens when you grow up in a culture that gave men almost no tools for building or maintaining close friendships, and then told them a romantic relationship would solve the loneliness problem. It won't. It can't carry that weight. Survey data consistently shows that men's platonic social networks have thinned dramatically over the past 30 years. A significant and growing portion of men report having no close friends at all. People they'd call in a genuine crisis. People who actually know them. The emotional infrastructure that women tend to build organically, men have been culturally discouraged from developing. And here's what this creates in the context of dating. Every romantic interaction becomes astronomically high stakes, not because the relationship matters more, but because it's the only potential port in a social storm. You're not just hoping to connect with someone interesting, you're unconsciously hoping to solve your aloneness. That's a different kind of search entirely, and the desperation it quietly generates is one of the most self-defeating dynamics in modern male dating behaviour. When some men hit pause on romantic pursuit and sit with the silence that follows, the loneliness that surfaces isn't about missing a partner. It's about realising they've been socially starving for years. That's a confronting realisation. It's also the most useful one they could possibly have. Because men who address the actual hunger, who go out and build real, reciprocal friendships, who join communities, who show up for people consistently with no romantic angle involved, Those men tend to return to dating completely transformed, not needy, not performing, just grounded. And that groundedness is, with very little exaggeration, magnetic. So what do? Before you troubleshoot your dating life, ask yourself honestly, when was the last time you had a real conversation with a male friend? Not about sports scores or work stress, but an actual conversation about your life. If you can't remember, you found the real starting point. Build that first. The rest becomes cleaner. This section makes some people uncomfortable, and I want to lean into that rather than away from it. There is a story that gets handed to men, largely without their awareness or consent. It goes something like this. Your value as a human being is proven through achievement and provision. Your emotional legitimacy, your right to take up space, to feel worthy, is confirmed when someone attractive chooses you. Without that external selection, you're somehow incomplete, still on trial, still waiting for the verdict. This story is so deep in the water supply that most men don't even recognize it as a story. They experience it as just reality, the way things are. And here's what it does to dating. It turns every rejection into a courtroom verdict, every unmatched profile into evidence, every faded conversation into a summary judgment on your character and worth. A 27-year-old named Brendan, software developer, thoughtful guy, genuinely self-aware, described it this way. I wasn't looking for a girlfriend. I was looking for proof that I wasn't defective. Let that land for a moment, because if that's the actual search you're running underneath the surface of dating, then every date is carrying an impossible psychological load. You're not meeting someone new. You're seeking exoneration. Psychologists have a name for this structure. They call it contingent self-worth, a model of self-esteem that's not actually stable because it's permanently dependent on external inputs. When the inputs are positive, you feel okay. When they're not, the floor drops out. And since rejection is a mathematical certainty in dating at some frequency, a man operating from contingent self-worth is essentially building his house on sand. The alternative, what researchers in self-determination theory call authentic self-esteem, is rooted in your own values, your own commitments, your own behavior over time. Nobody can take it from you because nobody gave it to you. A swipe left doesn't touch it. A ghost doesn't crack it. The shift from contingent to authentic self-worth is not something that happens because you read a paragraph about it. It's built through experience, through doing things that matter to you regardless of audience, through surviving difficult things and noticing you're still standing, through making promises to yourself and keeping them. Here's an honest question worth sitting with tonight. If you woke up tomorrow and somehow knew with complete certainty that your worth as a person was already settled, not earned, not at stake, just true, how would you show up differently? In dating, yes, but also in everything else. The distance between that version of you and the current one is a map of the work. Let me be precise about something before we finish, because this is the part that tends to get misread. None of what we've covered is an argument for men to avoid relationships permanently. The research on long-term well-being is reasonably clear that deep, committed partnerships, when they're functional, are associated with meaningful improvements in both longevity and life satisfaction. Connection matters. Intimacy matters. None of this is up for serious debate. What's different about the men who've genuinely found peace after stepping back from dating is not that they've decided human connection is overrated. It's that they stopped treating their relationship status as the primary ledger of whether their life is working. Those are completely different positions. A man named Elliot spent 4 years on the app treadmill. Some dates, some short relationships, mostly a kind of grinding low-level dissatisfaction. Not because the women he met weren't good people, because he kept showing up to dates as a half-constructed version of himself, still trying to figure out who he was, borrowing energy from the possibility of the relationship to fill a space that the relationship was never actually going to fill. He took 8 months off. Not dramatically. He didn't announce it, didn't make it an identity. He just quietly redirected his attention toward things that had been sitting in the waiting room of his life. He started a business he'd been drafting in his head for 2 years. He rekindled a close friendship that had gotten neglected. He got genuinely good at cooking, not for any performance, just because he liked it. At month 6, something had shifted in how he moved through the world. Not some mystical transformation, something quieter and more durable. He stopped needing things to work out romantically in order to feel like his life was on track. He's in a relationship now. He'll tell you the person he brought into that relationship was someone he's actually glad she met, not the anxious, approval-hungry version of himself that previous partners had encountered. That's the thread running through every man in this category who's genuinely doing well. Not that they've sworn off connection, that they stopped measuring themselves against the presence or absence of it. Here's what separates the men navigating this well from the ones who are genuinely stuck. The first thing is having an identity with a flaw that doesn't depend on other people. Not independence as armour, just a stable centre of gravity and something you'd be doing, building or caring about regardless of whether anyone was watching or approving. That centre is what keeps rejection from becoming catastrophic. The second is having genuinely close relationships that aren't romantic, not acquaintances, not work colleagues you grab coffee with, people who actually know your situation and would show up for you. This is the infrastructure that most men are quietly missing, and it affects everything downstream, including how they show up romantically. The third, and this is the one that tends to unlock the other two, is having enough honesty with yourself to know what you actually want, not what you've been told to want. Some men reading this genuinely want a partner and a family and a shared life. That's not something to apologize for or suppress. Other men, at this season of their lives, genuinely don't, and pretending otherwise produces the kind of hollow, going through the motions relationships that neither person deserves. Both answers are legitimate. The problem is when men pursue one while secretly living the other. The question worth closing on isn't whether men should date or not date. It's whether the version of you that would walk into a relationship tomorrow is someone you'd actually want to spend time with. If the honest answer is no, not because you're broken, but because you haven't finished building yourself yet, then the time you're giving yourself isn't a retreat, it's construction. That doctor from the beginning of this video, he started seeing someone 3 months ago, not from an app, through a hiking group he'd joined because he genuinely loved being outside. He showed up as someone who already had a life. She noticed the difference immediately. She noticed something real is growing from that ground. That's not a coincidence. That's what it looks like when a person stops performing and starts just being,